say follow me. I'm sitting on top of the world, on top of the world. Life's too short not to really live. I got a big heart, I can let you in. I'm sitting on top of the world, on top of the world.
Hi there, and welcome back to Toxic Bliss, Surviving Narcissism with me, Awen Reese. You may be able to tell that I have a little cold again. Ugh. If I sound stuffy, it's because I am, but I'm so excited. We're almost at the end of Season 1 of this podcast journey, and I am super eager to dive into Season 2, so I don't want to wait for this cold to go away to record. I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone for the incredible support you've shown me as the story unfolds. It's not an easy tale to tell, and I've had more than a few mental health breaks along the way, as reliving these events has stirred things up in my head after all these years. But it's an important story that needs to be told. If you've enjoyed this series and look forward to much more to come, please consider supporting the podcast. There are a lot of ways to do that include things like leaving a review, especially if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. You can share the podcast all around social media, which is a huge help. If you want a more direct approach, you can join my Patreon page, which I'm actually starting to get the hang of using, so there'll be a lot more content there. And of course, direct access. I also have a Teespring store with some great Toxic Bliss merchandise. I've bought the items myself to make sure I was happy with the quality, and the hoodies are my personal favorite. If you'd like to find me on the internet, I have tons of projects going on YouTube. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and you can always join our Discord server. Links for everything can be found in the description of each episode. Again, thank you so much for your support, and I hope to talk to you soon. Now, let's get back to our story. In the last episode, Mike had come back to stay for a short time as he was between places to live and had successfully guilted me into saying yes against my better judgment. It had only been about 24 hours and things were about as tense as could be. I was under an extreme amount of stress. I felt like I couldn't exist in my own home without risking a fight over something. He was so mad that I wouldn't let him use my computer. He griped every time I took a phone call. He didn't like this for dinner or that for dinner. He completely ignored the fact that he was only there as a short-term guest, and I was not catering to his every desire or whim. He complained about everything, and I never knew what was going to set him off. I was walking on eggshells around the clock, and let me tell you, that gets awfully tiring. Every single thing that I did was wrong. I changed Mac's diapers wrong. I bagged up the trash wrong. The way I put the cases of soda in the fridge was wrong. I folded all the clothes the wrong way. He always had a tip or a better way of doing every bloody thing. Although he would play this off as trying to be helpful and showing me easier, more efficient ways to do things, it was really just a ploy for dominance and control, as well as a tool to chip away at my self-confidence. When you feel like you can't even wash dishes correctly, you tend to feel as though you are hopeless and lost, and you can't function without someone there to fix everything. This was pissing me off something fierce. All I wanted was peace and quiet. I wanted the freedom to pursue things with Liam and to plan for our first meeting, with nothing but happiness and, you know, that feeling when you get lost in that exquisitely painful anticipation? That's what I wanted to focus on, not Mike. And although I had let Mike stay because I felt some sort of moral responsibility for him because he was the father of my son after all, that feeling was leaving with every passing moment I spent in his presence. If he didn't have a place to stay, why was that my responsibility? Why did I feel like I had to provide for him? He was 10 years older than me, a grown adult who should be able to fend for himself. After all, if I could fend for myself and 2 young children, surely a grown man could take care of one person without needing my assistance. While pondering that line of thought, I realized that he had never actually taken care of himself at all. He went from woman to woman, or back home to his mother, always having someone provide him a place to live and food to eat or whatever else he conned them out of. He had never had his own place that he was completely responsible for. He never had to worry about paying all the bills himself or making sure that there was food on the table. That struck me as rather profound and disturbing. He also had no understanding of the stress that can result from being the sole provider, although he loved to play savior by throwing some money around when it suited him, as though he was some great benevolent benefactor come to save the poor starving children from their fate. The few times in our history that he would hand over some cold hard cash, he would behave as though we should all bow down to him and be eternally grateful. $100 for groceries once in a blue moon does not equal providing for your family, and he absolutely did not understand that. Partly from lack of real-world experience, but also from his ability to charm his way into the hearts and minds of women like myself, eager for companionship and love, and an overly powerful desire to nurture, help, and protect others. I remember sitting at my computer, listening to Enya through my headphones, and having this realization. It suddenly hit me like a ton of bricks. I had a very unhealthy drive to fix other people's problems. I had a need to take a wounded soul and nurture them back to health. Now, those aren't necessarily bad qualities. Being empathetic to others and wanting to make other people happy and help wherever you can, those are admirable and noble even. But, there's a catch. And I had just figured it out in that exact moment, or at least I was beginning to catch on. If Mike made a series of bad choices and decisions that led to his current predicament of near homelessness, that wasn't my fault. I didn't make those choices. Although he would place the blame at my feet for throwing him out, which you could say that he had a point there, but it was his own behavior that led to that happening. He chose to hurt me in 100 different ways. He could have chosen differently. Cause and effect. His actions have consequences, and that simple truth was not part of his worldview at all. Every bad thing that had ever happened to him was someone else's fault. The 90 days he spent in jail for the physical fight with his ex-wife, that was her fault for trying to prevent him from leaving her. If she had just let him go, he wouldn't have had to knock her down. That was his honest view of things. He truly believed that. And he wouldn't need to stay here with me now if I hadn't thrown him out time after time. Circular logic is the greatest understatement of all time when it comes to people like Mike. The strength of his sense of entitlement and the complete lack of personal accountability drove his entire existence. Because of my hyper-empathetic behavior, I looked at his situation and imagined him sleeping outside in a park or under a bridge, and I could feel very powerfully the fear, the loneliness, the sense of having lost everything there was to possibly lose in life. And I wouldn't have wished that on my worst enemy. I wanted to shield him from that. Couple that with the fact that I also felt partly responsible since I did kick him out after all, and suddenly my reasoning for letting him stay became clear. That clarity also brought the other side of the coin into focus for me as well. I could feel bad for his predicament, but also not feel responsible for it or feel the need to fix it for him. I did not have to fix his problems. I wondered if this is what all that tough love stuff was about. There was one of the most important lessons that I've ever learned in my life. There's a difference between having empathy for others and being an empath. I will get into this much deeper in a later episode, but for now, suffice to say that being able to understand the experience of another person is normal, it's natural, and it's good. But when understanding another's experience leads you to act in ways that are even harmful to yourself, it becomes dangerous. I continued to sit at my desk, still listening to Enya, as I am doing while I'm sitting here writing this right now, and I cried. Not out of sadness, but because it felt like the weight of the world had just been taken off my shoulders. Okay, maybe not the weight of the world, but at least the weight of a 220-pound man-child. The path forward was clear, and it looked so bright all of a sudden that I had to close my eyes just for a moment to bask in its glory. I'm going to pause here for a word from my sponsor, but when we come back, it's time for me to step out into the light and begin a whole new chapter of life. Welcome back. Let's get right back into it. Mike had noticed that I was sniffling and blowing my nose a lot. He walked over and said, "What's wrong with you now?" in his snide, accusatory tone of voice. I laughed. It was funny. I laughed out loud and strong, and I said, "Nothing's wrong at all. In fact, everything is perfect. I had a revelation, and it's just so exciting I can't contain myself." "Oh?" he asked with an eye roll. "About what?" "About you," I said, still laughing. He snorted and said, "Sure. Okay, let's hear it. This should be good." "Well, it's good for me anyway," I chuckled. "Not so much for you, but I'll share it if you're really interested." He shifted his stance, looking a little less condescending and a little more nervous now. "I just realized that you're not my child." I uttered those words with a glee that was unmistakable. I'm sure he was incredibly confused, as this was an obvious truth, but the implications of my statement were beyond his ability to comprehend, so I had to explain. I said, "You see the kids, Maggie and Mac? I made them. I made every cell in their bodies. I brought them into this world, and I have a responsibility to ensure their welfare, health, happiness, and to keep them from harm in any way that I can. But I didn't make you. I have no such responsibility for you. If you manage to bring harm into your own life through your own actions, then that's on your head, not mine. I haven't done anything to hurt you." He interrupted me. "Oh, throwing me out on the street time after time isn't hurting me, I guess? That's how you show me you love me then, is it?" I just laughed. I said, "No, honey, that's how I show you that your actions have consequences. Your choices have repercussions. That's how I show myself that I care about my own welfare, and that's how I protect the kids from harm. Those are the only 3 people in this world that I have to be responsible for. You're not one of them." He started stammering almost incoherently. He was saying things like, "Throwing me out on the street hurts me. Calling the cops on me hurt me. Calling Jesse's husband hurt me. But it's okay when you do things that hurt me, right? Huh? It's okay when you do it?" He couldn't see the fallacy of his own argument. Or if he did, he didn't care. He was trying to save his own skin in that moment, and thought that trying to make me feel guilty was going to work. He was very wrong. I tried the logic approach with him, more out of curiosity and a love for logic than any real hope that he'd have an epiphany of his own. I asked him this. "If I took, say, this heavy book here and threw it at your head, what would you do?" And true to form, he answered, "I'd knock your block off and make sure you were unconscious, and then I'd walk out." And I just laughed again. I said, "Right. So, if I assaulted you, you'd defend yourself, and I'd probably get hurt in the process, right?" He agreed eagerly, thinking that I had just proved his point. "So, what if that happened, and the police were here, listening to that? Would you think that they should take you or me to jail for assault?" And he answered, "Well, you, obviously, because you started it." "Okay," I said, "but what if I convinced the police that I had never thrown the book at your head, that you just randomly attacked me for no reason, they took you to jail? Would that be right?" "No, that's stupid. But women do that all the time. They always lie about this stuff, and they never think they're to blame for any of it, just like with Tina." I stayed silent for a moment, hoping that he may have just realized what had happened, but he didn't. He just looked at me with his mouth half open, breathing heavily like a caveman, in the same hyper-defensive frame of mind that I had seen so many times before. "So," I proceeded, "if you do a bad thing to me, and I react by throwing you out to protect myself, who's actually at fault?" He stared at me, huffing and puffing. He was so obviously trying to think of a way around this and not coming up with anything. He balled up his fists and scrunched them up against his eyes and said, "Ugh, why do you always do this to me? You screw things around all sideways and try to mess up my brain so I can't even think. God, I hate you." I instinctively moved to the other side of the kitchen table, so at the very least there was a piece of furniture between us. In case he launched himself at me, I might have a moment to evade if needed. I had pushed him to the edge, and anything could happen as a result. But instead of having a go at me, he turned and went to the closet. He grabbed his ugly giant green sea bags and started violently throwing his belongings into them. Stupidly, I couldn't resist poking the bear. "Going somewhere?" I asked with a smile. I'm not staying here another second, he scowled. Okay, bye, I said. I picked up the phone and I called my mother and asked her to come over and stay with me while he was packing up his stuff. She hadn't even known he was there at all, but she said okay and hurried over without a lecture, thankfully. I wanted her there, not because I thought the two of us could take him down if needed, but because I knew Mike was a coward and he wouldn't do anything with a witness sitting there. I could also see the police station from my front windows, so if I needed to call them, it would take them less than a minute to cross the street. I sat down at the kitchen table and I lit a cigarette, just to piss him off. He hated me smoking so much, and I didn't smoke inside because of the kids, but on this one time, it seemed fitting. Once my mother arrived, she sat at the table with me without saying a word, and she joined me in a cigarette. This was our way of giving Mike the finger, and it was good. I also showed her, surreptitiously, that I was holding a large chef's knife in my lap. I had taken it from the counter before I sat down, just in case. And this is a point I want to talk about before we end this episode. I knew that Mike was much stronger than I was. He was schooled in martial arts, and I could never win in a physical hand-to-hand fight with him. But I also knew that if it came to protecting myself, my children, or now even my mother, I would not hesitate to use that knife. Consequences be damned. I wasn't stupid enough, thankfully, to threaten him or even let on that I was holding it. It was purely for self-defense if he came at any of us, which he did not. And with that, I was extremely lucky. I did a lot of things wrong that day, and I put all of us in a danger that was completely unnecessary. I didn't understand back then just how dangerous people like Mike can be. I didn't know that I was risking my very life by confronting him yet again, and even purposefully poking at him and his emotional wounds. When a narcissist is backed into a corner that they cannot manipulate their way out of, they can become a genuine threat, and far too often situations like this end in tragedy. I was foolish to risk that, but it wasn't out of hubris, it was out of a complete lack of understanding and awareness about the dangers of narcissism, and that right there is one of the main reasons for this podcast. We'll talk at great length as the story continues about how to get out of a relationship like this safely. Please understand that what I did in this episode was not the right way to go about that. In the meantime, if you're in a situation and you need help, please reach out. The National Domestic Hotline is available 24/7 at 1-800-799-7233. That's 1-800-799-7233. Or you can reach them online at thehotline.org. You are not alone, and there is help available if you need it. As always, you can email me at awinreesepodcast@gmail.com. You can find me at Twitter at awinreese, and you can join our Discord server as well. All the links are provided in the description. So the next episode, Mike will be gone, theoretically for good, and Liam will be planning his first visit. I'm so excited. I can't wait to talk about our first meeting. It's going to be wonderful. Will Mike show up and try to spoil the fun? I think we all know the answer to that question, so tune in next time to see what happens. Until then, thanks for listening and take care.
People ask me what my secret is, I just smile.